This is one of the most ambitious energy projects ever attempted on the planet, and it's rising out of the North Sea more than 130 kilometres off the coast of Yorkshire. This £9 billion offshore wind farm will become the largest of its kind in the world, generating enough electricity to power around 6 million UK homes each year. But behind the scale and the record-breaking engineering, the project has become a flashpoint for debate over energy security, rising costs, and Britain's net zero future. This is Dogger Bank Wind Farm. The story of Dogger Bank begins with a problem Britain has been trying to solve for over a decade: how to secure reliable, affordable energy without depending on fossil fuels or foreign gas. That challenge became impossible to ignore after Russia's invasion of Ukraine sent gas and electricity prices soaring across Europe, exposing just how vulnerable the UK's energy supply had become. At the same time, the UK government had set an ambitious target of reaching 50 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity by 2030, and doing that meant building bigger, faster, and further offshore than anyone had before. Dogger Bank itself, a shallow sandbank in the middle of the North Sea, turned out to be the perfect site. It's far enough from shore to avoid the visual complaints that have plagued smaller wind farms, yet shallow enough, at just 15 to 30 meters deep, to use traditional turbine foundations instead of far more expensive floating technology. Development rights were awarded back in 2010, but it would take another decade of planning, licensing, and financing battles before construction could even begin. Now let's talk about what's actually being built out there. Dogger Bank isn't a single wind farm, it's three of them, named Dogger Bank A, B, and C, each with an installed capacity of 1.2 gigawatts, combining for a total of 3.6 gigawatts once complete. To put that in perspective, that's enough electricity to meet around 5% of the UK's entire annual demand. Each phase uses GE Vernova's Haliade-X turbines, some of the most powerful wind turbines ever built, rated at 13 megawatts for phases A and B, and upgraded to 14 megawatts for phase C. These machines stand around 260 meters tall, taller than most skyscrapers in London, with blades stretching 107 meters long. According to GE Vernova, a single rotation of one blade can generate enough electricity to power an average UK home for around 2 days. Across all three phases, roughly 277 turbines will be installed, connected by hundreds of kilometers of subsea cabling. Dogger Bank also holds a UK first. It's the country's first offshore wind farm to use high-voltage direct current, or HVDC, transmission technology, an electricity superhighway that moves power to shore far more efficiently over long distances than the alternating current systems used on older projects. Engineers describe it as proof of concept for the entire next generation of British offshore wind. So, where is £9 billion actually coming from? The project reached financial close in 2 stages: Phases A and B in November 2020, and Phase C in December 2021, together forming the largest offshore wind project financing in history at the time. The money was raised through a consortium of 29 banks and 3 export credit agencies, backing a joint venture between Norway's Equinor, Britain's SSE Renewables and Vårgrønn, with Italian energy giant Eni later buying a 20% stake in Phase C. The financing is underpinned by something called a contract for difference, a government mechanism that guarantees developers a fixed price for every megawatt hour they produce, roughly £40 per megawatt hour in 2012 prices. That certainty is what allowed lenders to commit tens of billions of pounds to a project that wouldn't generate a single watt of power for years. Supporters argue this is exactly how public policy should work, using guaranteed pricing to unlock private capital rather than direct taxpayer subsidy. But critics point out that these contracts are ultimately funded through consumer electricity bills, meaning ordinary households are effectively underwriting the project whether they realize it or not. And like almost every megaproject of this scale, rising material, labor, and financing costs over the past few years have squeezed profitability across the offshore wind sector, with some developers abandoning UK wind auctions entirely when the numbers stopped adding up. If you've enjoyed the video so far, we'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Now, back to Dogger Bank, because not everyone agrees this project is the win it's made out to be. Which brings us to the controversy. Dogger Bank sits inside a designated special area of conservation, a protected marine habitat home to sand eels, cod, seabirds, seals, and porpoises. Environmental groups have raised concerns about the long-term impact of installing hundreds of massive turbine foundations and cutting cables through such a sensitive ecosystem, even as the project is marketed as a clean energy solution. There's also been real engineering trouble along the way. During commissioning of Dogger Bank A, a 107-meter turbine blade failed, raising fresh questions about the commissioning process and the reliability of these first-of-their-kind turbines being deployed at a scale never tested before. And then there's the political dimension. Then, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak championed Dogger Bank as proof that Britain could deliver energy security and jobs while staying on track for net zero, even as his own government faced criticism for quietly rolling back other climate commitments. That contradiction, celebrating a flagship green megaproject while softening climate policy elsewhere, has turned Dogger Bank into a symbol in Britain's wider debate over energy and climate policy, with critics on both sides using it to make opposite arguments about the UK's energy future. There's also friction closer to the water's surface. Fishing crews who have worked the Dogger Bank for generations have warned that hundreds of turbine foundations and a dense web of subsea cabling will permanently reshape traditional trawling routes, forcing vessels further out to sea and raising fuel costs at a time when the UK fishing industry is already under pressure. Developers maintain that navigation corridors have been built into the layout and that compensation schemes are in place. But industry groups argue the consultation process moved too fast for genuinely affected communities to have a meaningful say. On top of that, supply chain bottlenecks have occasionally slowed progress, with components like turbine blades and monopile foundations manufactured across multiple countries and shipped in on a tight schedule, leaving little room for error if a single delivery runs late. Add in a tightening labour market for specialised offshore engineers, and it becomes clear why a project of this size, however well-financed, is never simply a matter of pouring concrete and bolting on turbines. As for the timeline, construction has been unfolding in stages for years. Offshore cable laying began back in 2022, foundation installation started that same summer, and turbine installation at Dogger Bank kicked off in August 2023. Just 2 months later, in October 2023, Dogger Bank made history as the first turbine began feeding power into the UK's national grid. Dogger Bank A has since had all 95 of its turbines installed and reached commercial operation in 2025. Dogger Bank B is following behind, with turbine installation set to continue into 2027, and Dogger Bank C, using the newer 14-megawatt turbines, is targeting final commissioning around the same time. Taken together, developers expect the entire 3.6 gigawatt project to be fully complete by 2027. Even before the last turbine is in place, developers are already looking at ways to expand generation in the wider Dogger Bank area in the years ahead. Nearby, but separate from this project entirely, energy firms RWE and Masdar are developing their own offshore wind farms known as Dogger Bank South, adding several more gigawatts of capacity to the same stretch of the North Sea over the coming decade. Whatever side of the debate you land on, there's no denying the scale of what's happening off the Yorkshire coast right now. A sandbank in the middle of the North Sea, invisible from land, is quietly becoming the engine room for a huge share of Britain's electricity supply for decades to come. Beyond the electricity itself, Dogger Bank has already reshaped entire port towns along England's east coast. Hull, Teesside, Newcastle and Grimsby have all seen new investment tied directly to the project, with turbine components pre-assembled locally and thousands of construction operations and maintenance jobs created in the process. Developers argue this ripple effect, factories humming, ports expanding, apprenticeships opening up, is just as important as the gigawatts themselves, giving coastal communities a stake in the UK's energy transition rather than simply hosting it from a distance. Whether Dogger Bank ends up remembered as the project that secured the UK's energy future, or as a case study in the true cost of the green transition, will depend on what happens over the next few years as phases B and C reach completion. Thank you so much for watching.